today we're going to go over a meme generator that I built in collaboration with an NFT project called Chubby Corns. So we'll go through some really I want to get into some weeds on it, get into some details on how certain things operate inside of it and why certain decisions were made and that kind of thing. But we can go into wherever that takes us. So if anyone has questions, or if you have questions in your project and you want to just ask those questions while we're going through it, I can probably use that as a good project to kind of show you, well, here's a method, or if not, there's likely another project to do that with. And then after that, Drew's going to go through generative art in Bildr. So I'm really excited to see this. I've seen the output of it, which is really cool, but I haven't seen how he actually did it. So I'm excited to see that. And then we'll open it up at the end for Q&A. And then also I want to ask a little bit about next year's Bildr hours, because we've been talking about doing office hours going forward possibly, and we'll do office hours one-on-one with any of you. So if you have questions or you want to go into your project, reach out and we can help out. But we're thinking about formalizing that and possibly instead of Bildr hour, doing like open office hours. It's kind of almost what it's turned into. It's just we're the only ones showing anything. It would probably be helpful for some of you to be able to say, here's the page I'm on, here's the thing I'm stuck on, and we just solve it in real time. Like we can just fix it with you right then or get you through whatever it is. But if you're not wanting to do it in public, we will do that in private too. So just reach out if you need anything. So I'll go ahead and show my screen. Let's see if we can see. There we go. All right, so this is the NFT generator project. So I'm sorry, the meme generator project that uses NFTs to generate the memes. So first, before I dive into anything here, I'm just going to slide over and show you how it works. So the first thing you do is you connect with MetaMask. You connect your wallet up, and once you're connected, then it goes in and says, here's your list of things you can use. So I'm going to go here and grab a friend. So we'll add one of those to the canvas and drag it around, and there's all kinds of things. This has gone through a couple iterations too. Nice little UIs to do things like spinning it. So you can kind of go like that. Now he's upside down. So this is the kind of thing people are doing with this, right? Swap out the backgrounds. I can change it to a different background. And it's pretty cool. This NFT project, the artists are amazing, and they're actually producing new background artwork every week. Like they're about to launch a bunch of holiday ones, and it's really fun stuff for their holders. And then I do have Drew's project in here. So it's got the deads in it. So we can, I like making the ghosts opaque. We'll do a little rotation on it and just kind of, he's like in the floor coming up, so it's just fun stuff like that. It's a really fun output. But there's some things in here that, there's a lot in this. These kind of projects, they look really simple. It looks like, oh, there's just a few things going on here, but really under the hood, there's a lot happening. Certain things like where are these background images stored, right? So we have a data collection for that. Or, if you've downloaded anything, where are those downloads? So if I go download this, now I have a download over here that I can open and come back to, right? So things like that, when you start getting into the details of how certain things work. So if I go and download this one instead, or download that one again. So now I have these two, right? And I can switch between them, right? So that, like these concepts of like, how do you click the button and set that somewhere and then set that back into the canvas and getting this order of operations going on. So that's kind of what I wanted to dive through, is these high level concepts of why structure it a certain way and what happens as you get further and further into a project. Because when this thing started, it was really, really simple. It was like, okay, I have a list of NFTs. I have a list of backgrounds, pick one. Cool, now I can move it around on there. And it went from there to all this saved data and restrictions and access and things like that. Looks like we need to let one person in real quick. There we go. So let's kind of dive into some of those high level things. So first of all, this is a single page web app, meaning that there's only one website address. It's just the slash. There aren't a bunch of routes like, slash about or slash blog or anything like that. It's just the main page. And so everything is encapsulated inside of that main page. So there's one route that takes you to this page here, and then everything else is opened within it in one way or another. The two primary ways that other pages are opened within a page. One way is the grids. So like this grid here, it uses a certain page, this row page called NFT memes saved canvases row, which is this one. So that's a very common way. We have one page opening inside of another page. Another way is on this main page, if I go look at the page load, we can see I do open MetaMask sign-in, where I open that other page, sorry, this page here, sign up with MetaMask, this one here. I open this page into a lightbox, and then I show the lightbox. So that's another very common way. Those are the two most common ways where you have a page being opened into a container or a grid showing the same set of pages over and over. I know that's old news to a lot of you, but wanted to cover that. That's kind of the conceptually single page web app, but I'm opening these other pages inside of that main page over and over for different purposes. Sometimes the context there is just open it up for a single use, like sign up with MetaMask. Other times it's a set of rows of things. And this is probably the most efficient way to build an app in general, but definitely with Bildr, because if you had things separated out in different pages, it's going to require the user to reload from the base over and over and over again. They'd have to like refresh and to go to the next page, that kind of thing. So single page web app is typically the way to go. Now let's walk through a couple of things that I'm doing here. So on page load, remember it popped up the welcome to NFT memes, connect with MetaMask wallet. So let's just look at what happens when I do that and how I'm using the information that occurs. So I'm actually doing a series of steps. And one thing to note over here on the left, you can see how I organize my things. So I have sign in, step 1, 2, 3, 4. So the very first thing I do is I check to see, are you already authenticated? Because if you are, then I can just go get your collections and see what you've got. And I've already got your wallet. I don't need anything else. So I can just skip some steps. But if you're not signed in yet, then I need to actually sign you in. So I go do the sign in with MetaMask action. And if it's successful, I go do the check collections. If it's not, then I throw an error. And this is the kind of thing where I was saying it starts off real simple, but then it begins to get more and more complex. So like all this error handling and having proper messaging for those errors and what's it going to look like whenever that error happens. So in this case, I actually have images that show up for like, this didn't work, or OpenSea failed, right? So I do a bunch of requests to OpenSea to get the NFTs. And whenever that fails or it's taking too long, it actually will pop up messages that say that. And then if it's successful, it goes through and gets, it looks to see if the setting in the system requires certain assets before you can access the meme generator, right? So the idea here is this meme generator is actually like a template project for collections to use for their own purposes. So Chubby Corns was the first one, but there's several others that are already signing up to use this for their own. So there'll be memes dot whatever their website address is. And so they'll restrict it to where only certain NFT holders can access it and only certain NFTs can be used. So I go through this series of checks. So, things look real simple, but really you've got to kind of sit down and go, what are all these steps? And there's two ways to do that. Sometimes I know a good bit about it and I'll actually like jot it down on paper, or I'll build a flow out somewhere else. And just like super high level, I'm not trying to design anything. I'm not trying to actually make anything work. I'm literally just trying to get, the ideas out in my head. But most of the time, honestly, what I do is I just come in and build, and then I go, oh, wait, I need another step in there, right? And so what I would do is go, I actually need to check that collections So I'll insert another step in between and change this to go, I'll make a new one, say sign in step 5, and then sign in step 4 will then go to sign in step 5 instead. And I'll just kind of like insert my additional conditional logic in there as I go. So let's go through and see what happens on success. So once something is successful, what I'm doing is actually run a flow back on the root page again. So I get all the way to the end of all that checking and everything looks good. Okay, so now I need to go back onto this page, and I've just created a flow on the main page called after sign in successful. So this is one of these concepts when you're in a single page web app. I've got this page open in a light box. Once it's done doing its thing, it needs to trigger something to occur on the root page or on some other page that I've opened inside of there. So conceptually, just this idea of running flows between pages, specifically open a page, run a set of things. When it's done, run a flow at the end back on the root page. It's a very common practice. So if we go look at what that does, if we go back to here and go after sign in successful. So this is that flow. So I do two things here. I open the collections list on the left, and then I set the wallet ID into this here. So if we come back, and I'll just refresh this page. So it'll kind of start over. I'll go connect. Okay, so it said, oh, you're already signed in. So it didn't do all the MetaMask stuff. It skipped all that, went and got the collections, added open the collections here, and then set over here my wallet address, right? So that, I mean, that's very specific, right? The concept there. But the point is that you're kind of going this back and forth thing between a page that you're opening and the root page. And Drew, feel free to stop me if there's any questions or anything, because I'm not able to see the chat really well. I'm like opening it, but it's hard to do it while I'm going. So let me know if I need to
I'll stop you. There is a couple questions about like flow views, but I don't think it's relevant exactly what you're talking about. So we can get into that after.
Cool. Yeah, just let me know. So, conceptually, I want everyone to understand that high level premise of I'm running these flows back and forth, but the most common scenario is I open a page, I do a series of things in context to that page, and then I go run a flow back on the root page. Now, the other way you could do this is I don't have to have this page. This page could just be a set of divs inside of here. So for instance, like inside of the lightbox inner, rather than opening this page into there, I could just build all my elements inside of there and run all my actions on the root page directly. The reason I typically don't do that is because there's two reasons. One is composability is really important in projects. It makes it much easier down the line to reuse something. For instance, like you might want to open this from somewhere else later, and maybe you've extended your project in a way that you can't see going in. You can't see that you're going to extend it in this certain way. So by making it component based, you'll have that option later on to do that. But the primary reason I do it is actually because it's just so much easier to manage. When I come back in here, if all of these things were inside of the root page and not split out like this, you can imagine all of these flows, all of these flows, all of these flows, all of these flows, right? So like every flow from every one of these pages would be inside of here. And it's just so much to deal with already. It's like you'd have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. So splitting things out into these page level components makes management so much easier, especially because typically what happens is you put this thing out there, you get a little bit of traction with it, and you're working with customers, and then you come back to it like a month later, and you really need to have that composability then. You need to be able to go, what am I looking for, right? And filtering through several hundred flows in one page makes it much more difficult. So, that process back and forth is real important. The next thing I want to go through is variables and how I'm using some variables back and forth across these pages. Before I do that, Drew, should I pause? Do any Q&A?
Just chatting about AppGyver's tutorials. I think you're probably good to keep going.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let's look at what happens. So before I go into the variables, let's talk about this element type, this canvas element. So this is actually a custom element type, but conceptually it's going to be the same idea, this passing of variables back and forth for all kinds of purposes. But the meme canvas element type is a custom element type that I had created just for this project. This element type will actually become part of the standard set of elements once I've got it kind of cleaned up in a nice way, and it's not really, all the input arguments aren't set the way that they really should be for proper use. But once it's there, it's really an HTML5 canvas that you can set any images into, any text into, and it just generates an HTML5 canvas with whatever it is that you put into it. It's a pretty powerful tool. You can use it for like games or anything like that. So it should be fun to watch what people do with it. But the way that all these element types work is you're setting data into them, right? So think about like the grid. You set data collections into it with the data binding. You can also just set the value of it with any JSON array, and every object of that array becomes a grid row, right? It's the same thing with this HTML5 canvas. It's actually the same thing with the canvas that's in the studio. I set a list of your pages from your project into that canvas in the studio, and the canvas renders them. So that concept in general of I have an element type, I'm going to set something into it. The element type interprets whatever that is and renders whatever it's needing to render. And typically it's either a static single value or it's a JSON array where you're going to be displaying a set of things in a certain method. So one thing to note here, what I decided to do, I knew I needed to store the information about what all the user had put into the canvas. I wanted to store that as a download when they click the download button. So when they click download, it generates the image, downloads it, but I also wanted to take that JSON and save it with that user's ID, so that way I could recall it. And that's what my downloads is. That's where that comes from, is that list. So to do that, I decided that I was just going to make one field in a collection. So I made a collection called user saved canvases. And I made one field called JSON. And I saved the entire JSON of the grid. Actually, there's the grid over here. I actually saved that whole thing just by itself as a JSON. So rather than trying to like make a collection for each sub piece and all these different things and like have all these different fields, I'm just taking the whole chunk of their whole thing they've put together and just save that entire piece in one field. And then when I retrieve that, I reuse it. So if we take a look at how I structure it, there's actually a grid underneath here that's default hidden. This one here, grid list canvas elements. And I'm doing some kind of tricky things here. So if we look at set, sorry, let me look. Can't remember exactly how we do this. I think it's on the binding. No, page load. So on page load, whenever it runs through, actually, let's just do it like this. So this is probably the easiest way. So when you drop something onto the canvas, it goes through, like, let's say you move something. Okay, so like you move an element on that canvas. When that occurs, I'm setting a variable into the root page of what was moved. And then I run on a page over here, the selected image page, which is, sorry, this one. I run this action called moved set XY variables, okay? So I click on something is done on the canvas. I take the information about that and I store it in a variable. I use that to find the specific selected element. And then I run an action on that particular row in the grid that sets certain variables into the root page. Okay, so it's hard to explain the reasoning behind that for the meme canvas in particular, but this concept of like, I'm constantly user does an action, I store it in a variable in the root so that I have access to that everywhere. And then I use those variables to run things on other pages that need to use those variables. And maybe I'm doing something like creating new variables here, or I'm setting additional data or whatever it is. But this concept of like, same as where I run a page back and forth, or run a flow on a page back and forth between things, I'm also constantly setting variables back and forth between things. And so is there anything that maybe I can go into a simpler example about setting variables back and forth? Are there any questions around variables? Anything else that I should step into there? Nothing, Drew?
Nothing in the chat about variables.
Cool.
We are talking SEO, which I can actually talk about that after you're done, Mark. I'll talk a little bit about SEO. So we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So this thing that I do, if you go into the page, I'm going to open up debug here. And inside of the console, there's a way to see all the variables that are stored. It's like right now, I've created all these variables doing this back and forth. So I have like, what are the backgrounds? I have them stored in a variable. What collections are allowed to access? What collections NFTs are allowed? Let me zoom in a little bit. I check and see, like when you deselect something, I store that. When I have the MetaMask wallet address, I have which collections you have, which background you've selected, all these different things that I keep. I'm retaining that information in variables because it's only needed like when it's being processed, right? This is information that's not necessary to store it anywhere or anything like that. So that's the main purpose of variables. And it's going to be different for every use case. In your use case, you might need one. In another use case, you might need 100 different variables being set. Conceptually, you want anything that you're going to use across pages inside of the single page web app, put them in the root. Anything that you need to run locally or use locally, put them in the current page. Right. So that conceptually, that's kind of the whole thing with variables. But in a project like this, even a simpler project like this, I'm constantly set variables, use those variables, set variables, use those variables. And I can go like into super detail here, or we can just jump into, I think we should probably just jump into questions, Drew. Honestly, like we can go through, we can dive back into anything. So I'd rather help people with their stuff than just go through more random, you know? So you want to jump into the SEO one?
Well, for the SEO stuff, I would just kind of say we're basically saying the question was more like, can Bildr do the SEO? Is it good for websites and blogs? And my answer was basically like, yes, Bildr can do like full legit SEO, but we don't have, I don't think, any documentation on it or much, if there is a little. And we really need to do like a new interface. Like there needs to be an interface in the studio where you set your SEO stuff, which there's not right now. So the way I do it is I have sort of like almost like a template of the key things that need to get added. And I create a page header for each page. And part of that is you can use dynamic data in page headers. So for like a blog page where the actual blog articles are getting generated dynamically, I'm using dynamic data in that as SEO information. So really the answer is I need to document that process or we need to make the interface. But I guess what I would say for right now is I can help anyone one-on-one. So if anyone wants to do SEO and wants to dive deeper, like reach out to me, either email, Discord, whatever, like I'm just Drew at Bildr. But I'll put a priority on documenting that somehow. And one place you can go in the meantime is if you go to the bildr.com website, every page, like it's a pretty buttoned up SEO wise. So if you go to the inspect or view source on the page, you can see some of the stuff that's in the head tag. That's just there's a custom page header on every page. That's how I did it. And what I did is like for the share image and for the fave icon, I upload them to the Bildr media library. Then I just paste the URL in. So it's kind of manual, but yeah, you can see in there, all the information is there, including one of the important things I do, especially for Bildr, because it gets some traffic, is I use like a canonical tag so that Google will not pick up any of our test URLs, like stuff like that. So you can go pretty far. And I think you can actually do full-on sitemaps, like XML sitemaps, which I didn't do for Bildr, just personal preference. I don't really do those anymore. But I think you can go like full on and get anything you need SEO-wise done. But if there's any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them on that stuff.
And I am going to actually add, there is the basic SEO in here. So, you know, the icon and the description and the OG image and that kind of thing. So if you at least just share the site, it's going to look nice. Like you have a nice Twitter image, you have all those things. But I also am going to make these downloads are records. And so eventually you'll be able to go like /meme/ whatever the ID is of that record. And you can actually just like pull that one back up. And it's like, almost like a display page for it, and where you can download it and that kind of thing for sharing it effectively. And that share page needs to use what Drew was just talking about with the dynamic data as part of the SEO information, right? So like it needs to use some naming information that I want to use the actual image itself as the OG image. So that way it shows up. Like if you just share the link to that one on Twitter, it would actually be this image, not like the main image for the site. So you can do it totally dynamic that way, where it's all based on the data itself, which is really what you want for anything that's like blog posts or anything where you have multiple records of data that are publicly shared. Oh man.
So I just wanted to interject. I think where Fraser was going was just more of a general question as to the awareness of the need, or whether or not you feel there's a need as you start building out an app and you have more and more flows. Trying to visualize those flows and track and remember them over time gets a little more complex. Has some thought been given to, I know it sort of disturbs the current flow of the UI, but a way of visualizing that?
Oh yeah, no, I want it bad. Trust me, like you can see
that's basically what I answered too, is we all really, we have some cool ideas for like this, but and we all want it. It's just not there yet.
Yeah. It's coming. No, it needs,
so noted.
It needs to be, there's two layers to that. One is when you're on a page, and you've got this list of flows that are alphabetical, and then like that's okay but you, like you just said, you kind of have to know, you have to remember what you had built, right? Which is usually okay while you're building, but if you leave it for a couple of days and you come back, it's like, oh, how did I do that? Especially as the project gets more and more complex. So totally feel you there. So that one place in doing the flows is right there, where really it's fairly straightforward.
Right.
It's, what's the page load? Just show it in a canvas view versus a list view. Show it in a canvas, list it out. Not listed out, but organized out, because typically there's going to be like some conditional logic in there. You need to see how it splits. You need to see where it ends and all that kind of stuff. See if there's any loops, for instance. But then the other place is based on the elements, right? So you have, right now, you've got this, like you click on it and you see the events and you can go to the flows. Basically, I want to short circuit that view, so that when you click on an element, it's just much easier to see like what are all the things that it does. Same type of view that I just described, but rather than starting from the top, you start from there. And then the other place at that level is inside of the action of a flow. Right now, we don't do a good job of showing you. We show you the conditional logic, but you can't see where that goes without clicking on the conditional logic action and then going down into it. Like that should just show you inside of you've got this top to bottom list and you have a condition. If there's an action called in there, it should just list it right underneath it. So you don't have to like dive all the way into the whole thing to see it. So that whole thing, I call that sort of like the flows visualization, but there's a page level visualization also that needs to occur. We need to do a better job of visualizing that for you in the studio.
Right.
So this is where, like, here are all my routes. Right now you need to do that on your own in the canvas, right? So I'm pretty careful about how I structure my pages in the canvas for that reason. I want to make sure that I have, this is the top level route. And then all the pages I'm using underneath it are sort of like below it, right? So when I come into my studio, I can see really easily, here's all the routes and here's all the detail around them. But as projects get more and more complex, that really needs to be a dynamic view, because I'm reusing the same page across a bunch of pages. Sometimes I have it, the project is so big that I have like 5 workspaces and I can't see them that way. So I just want to see a flow. Like, walk me through what happens if a user goes to this route, what are the possible pages they could go to? What are the pages that are dependent? Just show me all the dependencies, basically.
Mm.
So that will all come. Just a matter of time. It's priority, prioritizing.
I understand that part, but it's good to hear you explain it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Trust me, those things we feel that pain, that organizational of flows pain more than anybody. I can tell you that, because the Bildr project itself is just so big. And we have 3 people who work on it a lot from a configuration standpoint all the time, in addition to developers, right? And so because of that, it's even worse whenever you have someone else doing it, right? You don't even know the basis of whatever the ideal was that went in there. So
I hear you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
For sure. Drew, did you want to jump in, or?
Yeah, we can touch on too. There's a question about PWAs and offline
Sure.
and push notifications.
Yep.
And I don't know, Mark, if you know more than me on this. Like, I would basically answer that like, I think it's all possible, but I haven't actually done most of that yet.
Yeah, so PWA is no problem. I have a couple of apps that I built over the time of it doing that, where I have it as a PWA, save it onto my, just save it on my home screen or whatever. Offline is not there yet. We don't actually support it. Technically, you can do it because you can actually just store it in your own local stuff if you want to. Like, you can actually do it, but it would be fairly painful to get it done. And the push notifications you should be able to operate with, though. But it's going to be up to you to put that into the file, and like set it up properly, and actually like set it up in the PWA. I can't remember what the file extension name is for it. But that should be doable. Offline, though, for our data, we're not supporting offline just yet. Hopefully that answers it. Hopefully.
I think that might be pretty much it for questions. Unless people have more, you can feel free to just unmute and ask, or ask in the chat.
Cool. You want to jump in to generative art, Drew?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just gonna share my screen and cycle through some of these as I start to talk about this. But basically what you're looking at here is artwork that is randomized and created only with code, with Bildr. It's not code. I mean, it's Bildr, but it's not there. There's nothing like hand drawn that's uploaded. This isn't pasting images together. This is just CSS, basically, and HTML. And what it is for this is going to become these NFTs that Bildr's putting out, which we can fill in more details later. But what I thought was really cool about it is that it looks like this, and it looks kind of complex, but it's really not when you build it. And I think the way it's built in Bildr is pretty novel. So this is my project that generates this art. It's just 3 pages, this main page, a line, and a square. So you can kind of see there's lines in here and there's squares here that are getting randomized. What I'm doing, if I hide some of these crisscrosses really quick, is I'm just using grid lists, and then I'm randomizing some CSS properties, and it just creates all these like combinations. So I have 4 grid lists overlapping. I'm just going to hide 3 of them. So at a base level, I have a grid list in the center of this image that's repeating this line page. And this line page, when it loads, does a few things. Like, it sets a length for the line, it sets a color for the line, sets margins, which is like how close it is to the other ones around it. And then it sets a height, which is like a stroke width. Like, this is a div, so it's a height, but it's really like the thickness of that line. And each of these kind of properties, I use this built-in action, generate random number in Bildr, So in this case, this is the length of this line. I generate a random number between 30 and 70, save it as a variable. And then I do set style property. And I set the property of this div width to be that random number %. And I'm using a concatenate input type here, which just, puts several different types into one final value. So I'm just using a variable plus the percentage sign. But by doing that and setting the random length, color, spacing, and height, it's each of those lines. So I think there's 12 of them in that grid. Each one is going to do that individually each time it loads. You can see they're all a different color, they're all different length, there are different spacing in between them, and there are different line thicknesses. So that's the first step. And then when you layer the rest in, so I have, this is one grid, and then I do another grid over top of it that's rotated. So there's, in this case, it's rotated 45 degrees right here and even scaled up a little just for some variance. And then I have another grid positioned right on top of that that's rotated 180 degrees, and another one on top of that that's rotated 270 degrees. And remember, each of those is just displaying this line, but they're all randomizing. So then when you look at them all together, it starts to look like this. And one of the things I did too is one of them, this angle coming in here, one of them, one of those 4 grids, the angle is also getting randomized. So those angled ones, these all kind of look the same, but there's one that's a little different. They're different angles. And then the squares that you're seeing pop up are actually very similar too. There's a grid up here, which just repeats this one square, but that square, when it loads, sets a size, sets a position, sets a color, sets an opacity, and then I also set a shadow color on each of those squares. And it's the same thing. It's a random number, in this case, between 22 and 66. And then I set the width in pixels and the height in pixels. And then the last part of that is these color schemes. So on the main page, when the main page loads, I have a flow here that sets random colors. So the first thing I do is I create a variable which is like kind of like the choice of all the colors possible that I want to use. And I curated them basically, so they all look really good together. And so this is an array right here. And I just typed an array into this variable. You can actually create arrays in different ways, but I just typed, I know the structure. So there's like, a straight bracket and a curly bracket. And I'm just saying color this hex value, color this hex value. And then I use this action that's in the studio to get a random record from an array. And so I just do this a couple of times. So I have an array of, I don't know how many colors are in there, probably like 12 or 15 or something. I do get color 1, a random color from that array, get color 2, a random color, and get color 3. So each of these, every time you refresh the page, you're going to get variables for 3 random colors. And then I'm going to use those random colors all throughout. So like when this line sets its color in here, it's going to pull from that original. So it's actually what Mark was referring to in his, where he sets a variable like on the root page. I'm setting those colors on the root page. And then in this line, I'm referencing those 3 colors. So it's like this version's color scheme. And then same with this square, it's doing the same thing. It talks back to the root page to get its colors. So what happens is in the end, and actually this is a good example. If you look at this actually looks like 2 colors. And the reason is of those 3 random colors I chose, 2 of them are the same. It's probably like 2 of these tan and 1 blue, but you can get anywhere from 1 to 3 colors each time you generate this. And so it's kind of cool. And I think really like that's pretty much it. So I'd love to take questions, but the reason I was excited to show it is that there is no actual code involved in this. Like this is all just built-in Bildr actions, and actually a pretty simple version of it. It's a grid list and there's some random properties set on each row. And then the magic happens in like where I rotate them on top of each other, or, for example, these have this glowing effect because I'm using CSS box shadow. So I'm doing some cool things with CSS, and I'm putting these little dots on actually with CSS too, which you wouldn't even have to do that. I just did it that way. But yeah, so.
Drew, how are you getting the 12 and the specific number in each grid? Like what's the
Actually,
method
good
you're
question. So for the lines grid, I hard coded that 12. And what I did is on a grid list, you have these properties, where you set your row, page, etc. One of the properties is default data, which is just like what is going to be in that grid list when the page loads. And a lot of times using grid lists, you're loading, you're binding it to data, you're loading stuff in, and you forget even about the default data. But in this case, I use it to my advantage. So I put an array in here of blank objects. And I said 12, I'm not even sure, but I think that's 12. So this curly bracket just represents a blank object. I could put values in there too and use them, but I don't need any values. I'm just basically saying this grid has 12 objects. And so that's all I do. So for each of these grids, they have 12 objects. But for the squares, it's a little different. For the squares, and I don't know if you picked this up, but there's different amounts of squares. So this one has a lot of squares. That kind of has a lot. They kind of have a lot. Some of them have very little. Yeah, there's like 3 squares in this one. The way I do the squares is a little cooler. So on the main page, let's see where I do this. I have this flow called set square count. So the first thing I do is I generate a random number between 4 and 12. And then I use this action, which is also in the studio. It's not custom or anything, called generate JSON array of objects. And what that does is that generates an empty array. So the thing that I hard coded for the lines with the curly brackets, this is an action that basically does that. So I take the random number that's generated. I have a random square count variable, and I just create a blank array of that many items. So for the squares, if this value is 6, it's going to create a blank array of 6. And then I'm going to set the square grid to be that blank array. So all that does is it controls the number of squares. And then the squares themselves, each one will get those properties. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. And so just to kind of like step it back. So a bunch of grids are rendering, and then every one of those grids has a set number of rows. There's the lines each have 12 or so, and then the boxes are random number of them. And then each one of those is actually, like in Bildr terms, every row is a Bildr page. Every box is a Bildr page. And so now you're running all these actions inside of those pages. And that, I just wanted to call that out because that's like, that in essence is what grants Bildr a lot of its power, is this idea of there's this page over here that I'm going to use, like the square page or that line page, and I'm going to have a set of actions that can run. And the number of times those things can run in their own like instance on the page is really large. It's very, very fast. Like the rendering and the action methodology that's used in there, the queuing that's used in there is extremely fast. So you can do really complex things across a lot of rows. Like I think it'd be like he could probably keep going on this for a long time, like adding more and more complexity and more things to it. And it's still going to pop real fast because it's all just really quick JavaScript. Drew, there was a question about converting the artwork to SVG or JPEG and then storing it.
Yeah, right now, I've used a third-party library to save things as an image. So that's definitely like a base level option. And that's what I did for the NFT, the Dead So Ghost that I have. Those are getting generated in Bildr, not from this. They're getting generated from layers of actual artwork. But once you're done, I just use a third-party library that takes the layers, saves them as a PNG. We also have an action that actually, it's not in the studio, right? The save image action.
Yeah, not
it
yet.
exists somewhere, right?
I need to clean it up now. I have it now, but I haven't cleaned it up yet.
But yeah, so at some point there'll be an actual Bildr action that you can make an image from anything. So anything that's on the canvas, whatever it is, and whatever HTML is inside, you can just save it as an image. And then lastly, for SVG, because that's actual code, I haven't tried this yet, but I would like to. I'm pretty sure that I can take all the information that I have in here and figure out a way to actually generate the SVG code, and then just it'd be a quick custom JavaScript function to save that as a file. So that'd be an option too. But I think for right now, like if I had to put this out tomorrow, I would just add that third-party library that saves an image from what's on the canvas.
And the the one that those, like even that library or any of these things that take like a div and take all of its contents and turn it into an image, it's typically what it's doing is it's sort of like re-rendering that div. And then while it's rendering it, it generates the image. And so part of the problem with that, there are some limitations to it. Like if you have a video element or something in there, like it's not going to pick that up, right? It's got to be static. It can't be dynamic content. So that'd be the only caveat I would throw out there.
Yeah, that'd be a fun challenge too, though, one day, is figuring out how to do it with video, you know, where you can make like an NFT that's mixing video. I was actually talking to my wife about that because she wants to do like dance focused NFTs. And she was like, how can we do this with randomized video? And I was like, that's a good challenge.
You can do it with GIFs. I already started on for the meme generator with basically it's the HTML5 canvas, except it breaks a GIF up into all of its pieces, right? It just like each frame. And then you can manipulate each frame independently. So like you drop the ghost on to frame 1, and then I just show that across all of them, you know, across all the frames. And then when you go to like frame 3 and you move it, now if you take that and put it back into the GIF, then at frame 3, it's going to move that ghost to wherever it is. So that's the only way I've seen, but it's not technically video. I mean, I guess it is video, but it's, I haven't seen anything that does like actual video. So that would be cool. Get it, Edmund. Start. I think I hear some domain name purchases in your future. Go get them. And you need the .eth addresses now too. So you got to like spend a lot more money.
We were just talking about that yesterday, Mark and I, about how there's like these businesses that we're just kind of doing inside, and it's like for fun. It's almost like side projects that benefit Bildr, but like this meme thing is like a whole application. And we have like some more coming too, which I don't want to spoil, but like that is what we're doing. We're creating all these little startups and businesses, just like not in our, I don't want to say in our spare time because that diminishes it, but you know, we're just doing it. And it's like separate of also building out the studio and building out Bildr. It's pretty wild. Very fun though.
It's interesting how it all coalesces back into the same value proposition, which is why it works. Because otherwise you couldn't do it. You know what I mean? But because it constantly, like the actions that Drew is using here for generating those JSON array of objects based on the numbers in the random number generator, those come from like side project ideas that we have or that you all have. Like we do it all based on actual needs. So when somebody needs an action or needs an element type, that's where it comes from. And so it just drives everything forward. It's lots of fun. Well, we got about 5 minutes left before the second to last Bildr hour is over, but I'm happy to go into anyone's questions or project related questions for your own projects as well. So if anyone has anything they want to review, or we can do it offline too. If you've got anything that you need help with, we can get some time scheduled. But it is December. It's going to be 80 degrees Fahrenheit today here in Austin. So it doesn't really feel like December here, but it is interesting that we're wrapping up 2021, getting into 2022. Thanks, Edmund. Yeah, nice. Let us know if you need any help. But we're super excited for what's coming next. We're about to do another small release with some bugs that we found from this production release we did, or bugs that you all found, actually. Most of them were from everyone else finding them. But that'll come out, and some fixes for things like additional things, or changes, sorry, some changes for additional things in the users area and some other places where just needed a few updates. So that'll come out in another short release, hopefully next week or two. And then we're going to follow that up with the larger release where our focus currently is on the data APIs, right? So that's where we're focusing most of the dev attention. So if there's anything else that you all have priority on, let us know. But that's going to be the whole data API and collection API UI. There's a lot to that one, but that's kind of where the dev will be focused and for that next production release. So if there's anything else that you want for us to put priority on, chat us, let us know, and we'll probably end up doing another poll in this next one. And the very last one of the year, Quora will put together a nice poll of like, here's all the requests, here are the top requests, let you guys vote, and we'll go from there. Anything else, Drew? I think we're good.
I don't think so.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend, and we will be online. We're in Discord or Twitter or wherever you want to find us. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Good.
Talk soon.